Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session, Reimagining Education in Emergencies, pre-recorded for Rewire Summit. My name is Hyeon Kim, and I am the host of this session. We are researchers from Global Ties for Children at New York University, and we want to talk to you about the lessons we learned from the research conducted in three crisis-affected countries in this session. Today's presentation is made possible with support of Dubai Cares, and we are going to talk about the effective ways to support children's learning and development in conflict and crisis-affected contexts based on actionable evidence generated from the three humanitarian educational programming contexts, including those with Syrian refugee children in Lebanon, Boko Haram-affected children in Niger, and children living through multiple and protracted crises in Sierra Leone. The following sections consist of three presentations. First, Duha will take us on a journey into a day of Yasmin, a fictional character we created based on our research and experience with refugee children in real life. This presentation will walk us through what it is like to experience a life as a refugee child. Second, in the presentation titled Path to Recovery and Resilience, I will present a set of recommendations based on our research on how children develop and learn in the context of crisis. And in the third presentation, Lindsay will discuss the role of programming implementation, particularly focusing on student attendance and role of the teachers.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. Last year, our lives changed forever. Bad things started happening around us, and then the war began. My family had to escape to a safe place. Now, I live in a refugee camp in a small tent with my parents, my three younger brothers, and my grandmother. My parents told me that I'm grown up now and that I'm responsible for taking care of my younger siblings and cleaning and cooking while they are at work during the harvesting season. Sometimes I won't be able to go to school, but that's only when grandma is too sick to watch my brothers. We only have class in the afternoons and only with other refugee kids like us, because in the mornings, school is for hard country kids. We have to rush home after school because I'm scared when it gets too dark and the camp is little far. We have to walk 30 minutes back and forth each day, and I'm afraid bad things can happen to us. At school, they put me in the same classroom as my little brother. I'm back with 6-year-old kids, just like last year at home. It feels strange. Everything has changed. I miss my old school, my friends, and doing my homework in my own bedroom. I feel older than my age at home, but I'm put with younger kids at school. With all this, I sometimes feel stressed. Do you know what stress is? I don't sleep well, and sometimes I have nightmares. Sometimes I can't pay attention in class. I even have a hard time sitting still. It's so weird. I wasn't like this, always such a good student. Mrs. Hamzawi teaches classes all day long for both morning and afternoon shifts. Sometimes she yells at us because I think she is tired. She tries to help us understand, but there are a lot of kids in our class and some of them missed a lot of school when they traveled here. She doesn't always explain things to us in a way that we can understand. When I grow up, I want to be a teacher so I can help children like me and my little brothers. I will be nice to them and teach them my language and culture, and will listen to all their stories. It's hard for me to focus on studying these days with all the stress and responsibilities, but I will never give up my dream.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hayan Kim, and I'm a researcher at Global Ties for Children at New York University. Today, I'm here to talk about the best ways to support the well-being and learning of the children who are growing up in a conflict and crisis-affected context. Yasmin's story that we just saw is a story that we are also familiar with, a story of challenge, struggle, hopes, and resilience. But it's not just a story of a fictional character. It's also a story of real life experience of so many children growing up in crisis affected context. In fact, 1 in 5 children in the world are growing up in crisis affected contexts, including violent terrorist attacks, civil war, and global pandemic and health crisis. And I also know so many stories of people who are dedicated to support these children, make their life a little better, and help them learn and grow to become a productive citizens of the world. But the research in the humanitarian settings have been so limited and behind, and these actions are left without sound evidence-based recommendations. So in this presentation, I will focus on sharing the recommendations and proposed solutions based on extensive research that we have conducted with thousands of the children in crisis-affected contexts. The recommendations and solutions that we are sharing today in this presentation are based on our research in Lebanon, Niger, and Sierra Leone, conducted under the umbrella of larger initiative called 3EA, Education in Emergencies, Evidence for Action, which was conducted in partnership with International Rescue Committee and New York University Global Ties for Children. In Lebanon, we work with the Syrian refugee children who fled the violence of civil war. In Niger, we work with the Nigerian children, local children, and internally displaced children, and also Nigerian refugee children who were affected by Boko Haram attacks. In Sierra Leone, we work with the children who are affected by Ebola crisis. Based on this research, the first recommendation we make is to focus on helping children who are falling behind catch up. Specifically, we recommend considering both age, developmental levels, and learning levels in grade level assignment, classroom grouping, and also instructional program design. In the context of crisis and conflict, the children fleeing from violence and attacks and also exposed to various stressors and challenges in their life often also experience interruption in their schooling. What that means in real life is when they are ready to join their education again, when they start learning in schools again, many children often end up in a grade level or learning level that are lower than the expected for their age. We also see this in our data from Lebanon and Niger, as you can see in the graph on the left side. So as you can see, in both countries, more than 60 or 70% of the children are actually attending a lower grade than the expected for their age. That means they are older than grade level peers in their classrooms. In a study that we conducted with the Syrian refugee children in Lebanon, we found that being placed in a lower grade level than their peers compared to their age puts them in a greater risk of lower academic competencies. But not just that, it also is related to greater risk of lower executive function skills, cognitive skills that are necessary for learning, and also delayed development in behavior regulation skills compared to their same age peers. So it could be that these children who are placed in lower grade may have experienced greater challenges and adversities that puts them at a greater risk of academic and social emotional development overall. But it will also be that being placed in a classroom with younger children, which is designed to support the development and learning of the younger children, may not be as supportive for their own development as an older child. Given the disparity that we found in learning and development among the children who experienced crisis and conflict, even among the children who are of the same age group, and the greater risk that being placed in the lower grade puts in their learning and development, we recommend to focus on helping children who are falling behind catch up in crisis and conflict affected context. To do so, we make 4 suggestions as solutions. First is to consider both age or development level and also their learning level when placing the children into different classrooms and grade levels. And second, to provide remedial education so that the children who are falling behind in learning level can catch up and learn with the same age peers. And third, to provide differentiated support for academic and social emotional learning within a classroom where there are many children at a different developmental and learning level exist. And fourth, build teacher capacity to provide such differentiated support for learning and development in classrooms. The second recommendation that we make based on our research is to invest in effective social emotional learning programming. This means that investment in all cycle of social emotional learning programming, starting from design and development of the program, adaptation and piloting in the context and population, and evaluation and implementation backed by research. Children who are growing up in a context of crisis and conflict are not only affected by their experience of trauma because of the conflict and crisis that they experienced, but also affected by a myriad of stressors, challenges, and responsibilities that they have to juggle in their daily lives. As you saw in the story of Yasmin, these children are affected by these experiences and struggle to maintain their positive development in their social emotional skills that could support dealing with all these challenges. Recently, social emotional learning programs have been enthusiastically embraced by humanitarian sector, largely encouraged by positive outcomes of social emotional learning programs mostly implemented in Western developed countries. However, there are few social emotional learning programs in crisis affected settings have been evaluated. And also the emerging evidence of promising practices that exist, especially around the social emotional programs that are targeting specific skill building, the effects have been small and non-conclusive and not delivering the full potential and promises of social emotional learning. Given the limited evidence of social emotional learning programs in crisis affected settings and also its limited effectiveness we have observed so far, we recommend focusing on identifying and implementing promising practices with evidence of the promising trends. We also recommend focusing on culturally and contextually grounded design and implementation of such programming and making it more suitable for the population and culture and context. And lastly, we urge to invest further in research and evidence in every step of the way of program development, implementation, adaptation, pilot, and evaluation to build the evidence base that's necessary to make the social emotional learning program effective. The third and last recommendation that we make in this presentation is to focus on supporting the most vulnerable children in crisis affected contexts through identifying and screening for children in greater needs, providing targeted support, and prevent the potential harm for these vulnerable children. In the series of studies that we have conducted in Lebanon, Niger, and Sierra Leone, we found different types of children who can be classified as more vulnerable even in the context of crisis and conflict. First was the children who were put in a lower grade level than expected for their age, as we discussed, who were put in a greater risk for academic and social and emotional development. And second were the girls in Niger or some other certain contexts who tend to be performing lower than boys in academic learning level. And third, the children who were exposed to more severe level of war violence and school victimization in their lives as refugees. As you can see, the vulnerability that we found among these children were not limited to their demographic characteristics, but also their previous experience and history, as well as the current situation that they were put in their schools, socially and also systematically by their grade placement. To provide support for the most vulnerable children in crisis-affected contexts, we propose 4 solutions. First is to implement targeted assessment and screening for identifying vulnerability in specific context, population, and the program. As you saw in the previous slide, vulnerability can be defined differently, and identifying these various vulnerability can be a key to provide support for the most vulnerable children in specific program context. Second, we propose trauma-informed social emotional learning and educational programming as a solution to provide a generally more supportive environment that could also accommodate the most vulnerable children in universal programming context. Third, we also urge to provide targeted and tiered support depending on the level of vulnerability and challenges the children's experience. And fourth, we recommend to test and guard against the potential harm, especially for the vulnerable children. While most educational and social emotional learning programming is supportive of learning and development of all children, it may be causing harm for a certain group of children with specific vulnerability. Do no harm is the most important principle of the humanitarian work, and we can only prevent it by actively guarding against and testing against it. Thank you for watching this presentation. If you want to know more about the recommendations and the evidence that these recommendations are based on, please feel free to find me at my email, hayeon@niu.edu, or through Twitter at hayeonkim_dr. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Brown, a senior research scientist at New York University's Global Ties for Children, and I'm going to talk about the role of implementation in refugee education programming, specifically how these programs get implemented and what we should pay particular attention to. I'm going to focus primarily on 2 aspects of implementation in today's talk: student attendance and teachers. Let's start with what we've learned about attendance. As we saw with Yasmin, there's many different factors that can affect attendance in conflict-affected contexts. For example, students may have to care for younger siblings. They may go with parents to work outside the home to help earn a living, or they may feel unsafe walking to and from school. But attending school is critically important. It's the foundation of all academic learning. First of all, it determines how much curriculum a student is exposed to. Second, it determines how many practice opportunities students have to develop new skills and the consistency of those practice opportunities. It can also affect the stability of the classroom environment. But students may attend school less than we think in areas of conflict and crisis. Let's take the case of a program called Learn Safe that we studied in Sierra Leone. The published government calendar specified that there should be 179 days of school in the academic year. But when we analyzed the attendance data, we found that schools were only open 163 of those days, or 91% of the time. Security issues related to a presidential election and bad weather were some of the reasons for school closures. We also saw that classrooms were only open 148 days of the school year, about 83% of the government-intended days. Teacher shortages and teacher illnesses were common reasons for classroom closures. Last, we saw that students attended only 107 days on average, or 60% of the government-intended days. And this wasn't just the case in Sierra Leone. Across all three country contexts of the 3EA project, we saw students attended about half of the time on average. This means that students are only receiving half of the intended program as it was designed. As you might expect, this affects how much students learn in a given year. We saw across contexts that students who attended more learned more during the program. In Niger, we were able to use a statistical method to show a causal effect of attendance to the program. For all students who attended, at any amount, they improved in reading and math on average 0.2 of a standard deviation in reading and 0.3 of a standard deviation in math. However, our analyses showed that if students had attended 100% of the time, they would have learned twice as much in both reading and math. That's a huge effect. And from a policy perspective, attendance is a very actionable target. Some low or no-cost options that have been demonstrated to increase attendance at programs are dropping uniform requirements, creating community monitoring groups, increasing safe routes to and from school, establishing school feeding programs, and providing attendance incentives. Sadly, we know too little about attendance in the Global South, particularly in areas of conflict and crisis. Historically, there's been a focus on students accessing school, namely that they have a school nearby and that students are enrolled, but not necessarily actively attending. Second, attendance is not formally captured in many school systems, and if it is, it's with a pen and a paper that's kept at the classroom or the school level. Attendance can be surprisingly challenging to measure and track. Last, many donors are interested in the number of beneficiaries that a program has, or the number of students the program serves. If one student drops out and another one enters in his or her place, that results in twice as many beneficiaries. While we don't believe this incentive is intentional, it is a reality for many donor incentive programs. So what can we do moving forward? We recommend first investing in data systems that allow us to collect information about who is attending, when, and how often. Second, we suggest improving donor metrics to disincentivize turnover that results in poor student outcomes. For example, donors can track student attendance at a more granular level instead of beneficiary numbers. Last, we can investigate the barriers to student attendance in different contexts and work to address them. Ultimately, we want students to be able to get the most out of the programs that exist, and that can only happen if they attend. Next, I'm going to turn to what we've learned about teachers while working in 3EA contexts. The first thing we know is that teacher well-being is vitally important. Teachers cannot address students' well-being without being well themselves. Across contexts, we found that a major driver of teacher well-being was lack of teacher pay. We found that public school teachers were regularly not paid on time, or not paid the full and correct amount of their salary. For example, in our study in Sierra Leone, we found that 52% of teachers did not receive any payment from the government, and 38% of the teachers who were paid were not paid their correct salary amount. This type of non-payment, late payment, or incorrect payment can lead to increases in teacher stress, increases in teacher absences as they must find work elsewhere, increases in teacher turnover, and decreases in motivation and job satisfaction. For example, here's a quote from a head teacher in Sierra Leone. "I become tormented when the month is about to end about how to pay these teachers. We want you to know how they feel. There are teachers who make backyard cassava gardens because what we give them in school is not enough. If you think about the performance of the teachers, you will also think about their welfare. Is that not so?" Beyond well-being, we found that the quality of teacher instruction matters for implementation. Across contexts, we found that teachers struggled to perform foundational teacher practices, like facilitating classroom discussion. In 3EA, there were two parts of the lesson that were intended to be taught through discussion. The first was reflection. The teacher is intended to ask students a set of questions to guide them to consider how they felt before they started an activity and how they felt after, including what strategies they used during the activity. The second is transfer, or the idea that students can take skills they applied during that lesson or activity and apply them to other parts of their life. Again, the teacher is intended to discuss with students where throughout their day or week they may need to use the same skill and how they can apply it in that new situation. But because teachers routinely did not engage in these discussions or did not engage in them well, we believe that this activity was not implemented and the program was less impactful. Our evidence suggests that often these activities were purposely avoided because teachers didn't feel comfortable doing them. For example, here's a quote from a learning coach in Sierra Leone. Some teachers are not doing the concluding discussions, even if you keep on telling them. After an observation, you call them, you explain to them, you did not do this concluding discussion, and they will say, oh, I forgot, but they will keep on repeating it. So what can we do? In the short term, we must ensure that teachers are fully supported to implement the programs or curricula at a high level of quality. This means bridging the gap between what skills the program or curricula requires and what skills the teachers currently have. This will take a substantial investment in training, but it will ultimately pay off. Second, the teacher must be supported during the implementation of programming by high-quality coaching, peer learning groups, or other professional development activities. In the long term, we need to better understand what factors affect teacher learning in education and emergencies. We can do this by building a conceptual model to guide the field in generating and organizing evidence. Second, within education systems, we need to establish a framework of high-leverage instructional practices to prioritize and organize teacher learning. High-leverage practices are those like facilitating classroom discussion that can be used across grade levels, subject areas, and curricular approaches. Once these frameworks are established, we can use them to diagnose teacher instruction and provide targeted support. In summary, if we want students to be able to get the most possible out of education programming in areas of conflict and crisis, how we implement those programs matters. Student attendance matters. Increasing student attendance from 50% to 100% can double student learning outcomes. Teacher well-being matters. Paying teachers, paying them on time and the correct amount can ensure teachers are well enough to support students. And teacher instruction matters. We must support teachers to implement programs at a high level of quality through high-impact professional development opportunities. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our presentations. If you want to know more, you can find us at NYU Global Ties on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, or contact us via our emails. And don't forget to visit our website. You can find us by scanning this QR code on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you for watching.